Chapter 31. Love. Nikki's heart gave a huge thump.
"Dogs!"
she said.
"It sounds like dogs! I have to go!"
Yes, said Althea.
"Go! I'm so glad you came. But go now, quick!"
Nikki ran down the stairs and outside. The barking was louder, a yipping and yelping with some ruffs and woofs mixed in, a chorus of dog noise. Where were they? She ran toward the park. Other people were coming out of their houses, too, shouting at each other. When Nikki got to Main Street, she joined a stream of people. Cars on the street slowed down to see what was happening, and among them, Nikki saw, was Crystal.
"Crystal!"
shouted Nikki.
"Stop! Come here!"
Crystal rolled down her window.
"What?"
she called.
"What's going on?"
Nikki just pointed, because at that moment she saw the dogs coming from the uphill end of the road. A jouncing, prancing, jostling gaggle of dogs pouring around the bend and down toward the town. 10 dogs, or 20, or 30. She ran toward them, and in just a few seconds the pack was all around her, streaking by, and she turned to race after them.
"Otis!"
she screamed, trying to make out his small body among the flail of legs and tails.
"Otis, where are you?"
They were coming through downtown now, and people burst out of the stores and halted open-mouthed on the sidewalks. The dogs ran down the middle of Main Street, and it looked to Nikki, pounding after them, as if they might just run on through the town, out the other side, and back into the woods. But instead they swept around the corner when they came to Grackle Street, raced through the little park, and whirled in a circle, the lead dogs veering around to chase the dogs at the rear, around and around like a tornado, until a few dogs broke away, and then more did, until most of them had stopped running and were nosing around the garbage cans or raising their legs against the trees. By now a crowd of people had rushed down the street to the park. Nikki was among them. Their voices flew all around her.
"I see Max!"
someone cried joyously, and someone else called out,
"Look, there's Missy! Here, girl, come on!"
Right in front of Nikki, a few people wearing "Don't Do It" t-shirts halted at the edge of the park. They stood there with their shoulders hunched and arms folded, as if to ward off any dog that might come near. "This is a bad sign," one of them said. The other muttered something that Nikki didn't stop to hear. She pushed past them. Where in that swirl of dogs was Otis? Was he there? She didn't see him. A boxer had knocked over a garbage can, and 5 or 6 dogs rushed to paw through the contents. A black dog was on its hind legs at the drinking fountain, lapping water from the stopped-up bowl. People rushed every which way, calling dogs names, clutching them by the collar, and the dogs leapt up, licked faces, thrashed tails back and forth. But where was her dog? A dread seized her. What if he wasn't? But he was. There, under a picnic table, nose to the ground, sniffing at a scrap of paper, tail pointing straight up.
"Otis!"
Nikki screamed. And he looked up in surprise. When he saw her, he cocked his head, stared a moment, and then ambled toward her with the scrap of paper sticking to his nose. She caught him up in her arms, squeezed him tight, rumpled the top of his head, and told him how happy she was, over and over. He wiggled. He licked her chin. Twigs and burrs were tangled in his coat, and his feet were wet and packed with mud between the pads. He smelled like earth and rot and dog dew. He was a mess. Then a sharp voice rang out above the noise of the crowd.
"Wait! Wait!" it cried. "This is wrong! We mustn't do this! We can't take them back!"
And Nikki saw Brenda Beeson standing at the edge of the park, wearing her red baseball cap and waving her arms above her head. A few people turned to look at her. A few of them paused. Then a dark-haired woman bent down, scooped up a small dog, and took it over to Mrs. Beeson. It was Sausage, Nikki saw, with her droopy ears all stuck with burrs. Mrs. Beeson stared at Sausage. She reached out, and then pulled her arms back. She turned away. She turned back again. And finally she just stood frozen, with a look of desperate confusion on her face. And at that moment, a gasp arose from the Grackle Street side of the crowd, and all heads turned. Down the sidewalk, slowly and slightly tippily, came Althea Tower. She was wrapped in a voluminous gray cape, and although she had tried to fasten her hair back with a ribbon, most of it had come loose, and the breeze made it float around her head. She was so short and slight that she looked almost like a child, a frail, excited child, hurrying toward the place where something was happening. People were so amazed to see her that they just stared as she came closer. At last, 2 young men ran forward to help her. They led her into the park. People crowded around her, and Nicky heard her say, "Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm all right. A girl came and shouted at me. That girl right there." She pointed at Nicky, smiling. "And, well, I woke up." Then she murmured something to the young man on her left and tilted her head in the direction of Mrs. Beeson. They walked with her to where Mrs. Beeson stood flabbergasted, her eyes darting back and forth between Althea coming toward her and Sausage squirming in the arms of the dark-haired woman. Althea took Mrs. Beeson by the arm, and the 2 of them went apart from the crowd to talk. Nicky, who knew what they would be talking about, saw no need to stay any longer. She left the park and the chaos of people and dogs behind, and carried Otis back toward Greenhaven. When she was halfway there, Crystal, who had driven home and parked the car, came running toward her. "What in the heck is going on?" she said. "The dogs are back," said Nicky. "Look, this is Otis." Crystal stooped over and looked Otis in the face. He opened his long pink mouth and yawned at her. "Cute," she said. "I'm keeping him," said Nicky. "I don't know," said Crystal. "Does the building you live in allow—" "It does," Nicky said, though she didn't know if this was true. She didn't care. She'd make them change the rules if she had to. If they wouldn't, she'd make her mother move. "Well," said Crystal. But she didn't argue. Back at Greenhaven, they put the last of their belongings into their suitcases and carried them out to the street. The sun blazed down, glinting off the car and the scraps of snow still left from 3 days before. They put their suitcases in the trunk. "I have to stop at the real estate office on our way out," Crystal said. "Just for a second." While Crystal was in there, Nicky sat in the car with Otis on her lap and picked the stickers out of his fur. Dirty as he was and smelly, she adored the feel of him leaning against her. After a while he got sleepy and lay down with his head hanging sideways over her leg, and she adored the way his mouth looked upside down, with his black lips and the tips of his teeth showing. She picked the dried mud out from between the pads of his feet, and didn't mind at all that she got dirt under her fingernails. Crystal came out of the real estate office quite a while later, just as Nicky was starting to wonder what was taking her so long. Len was with her. When she got into the car, she rolled down the window, and he bent over, curling his hands over the windowsill. "So I'll let you know," he said. "It should be tomorrow, or the next day." Crystal nodded. "I don't even know how to feel about it," she said. "But you'll call me." "Oh, yes," said Len. He looked at her in a meaningful way. "Oh, yes, I'll call you. Never fear." Crystal smiled. She put one of her hands over one of his. "Goodbye, then," she said, looking up at him, and quickly he poked his head a bit further through the window and kissed her on the mouth. It was just a peck, but even Nicky, with her limited experience of being in love, could feel that it was quite thrilling to both of them. Crystal pushed the up button to close the window. She put on her sunglasses. She stepped on the gas. They sailed down Main Street and out of Yonwood. "What's he going to call you about?" Nicky asked as they rounded the curve toward the highway. "The offer on the house. Looks like the Hardesties are vacillating. They found another place they think might be better for their purpose. They might withdraw their offer." "Then what?" said Nicky. "I'm not sure." Crystal accelerated and merged with the traffic on the freeway. "It depends on... I don't know. We'll see. They rode in silence for a while. Nicky worked on getting a twig untangled from Otis's ear hairs. Then she said, Len sure likes you. A small smile appeared on Crystal's face. I know, she said. I like him, too. Is he going to come to New Jersey and be your boyfriend? Oh, heavens, said Crystal. I don't think so. She stepped hard on the accelerator and passed 2 slow trucks. Still smiling that small smile, she glanced over at Nicky, who was working very slowly on the twig, trying not to pull Otis's hair. I think you're in love, she said. Nicky looked up, startled. With that pup, said Crystal. And with a sort of shock, Nicky realized it was true. She had definitely fallen in love with Otis. This was being in love, wasn't it? Looking forward to seeing him every day, feeling like a hole was ripped out of her heart when he was gone, jumping for joy when he came back, not minding if he smelled bad, wanting to take care of him, actually liking the dirty and funny-looking parts of him. Surely it was being in love. It was true that she hadn't fallen in love with Grover, the obvious candidate. She'd fallen in love with a dog instead of a person. But that didn't matter. It was still love. She'd apply it to a person later on. They drove back to the city. There, Nicky carried out the good idea she'd had. With Crystal's help, she sold the photograph of the Siamese twins for $350. She added $25 of her own, and she sent that money to Grover. She put it in an envelope with a note that said, Congratulations! You have won first prize in the Grand Amalgamated Products Association sweepstakes. A few days later, she got a postcard from Grover that said, A very nice specimen of the triple-fanged magenta-spotted rat snake will soon be on its way to you in the mail. Thank you. Fortunately, no rat snake arrived. It turned out that their building in the city did not allow dogs. But it also turned out that this didn't matter, because of the letter that came from her father the very day Nicky got home. Her mother opened it and gave a joyful shout. He says his job has been made permanent, and he wants us to come and join him, she said. You'll never guess where he is. Oh, said Nicky. I forgot to tell you. I know where he is. California. You're right, her mother said. But how did you know? He told me, in those postcards, said Nicky. I figured it out. I knew he wouldn't be writing those strange PSs for no reason. They made no sense to me at all, said her mother. What did they mean? If you'll get the postcards, Nicky said, I'll show you. Her mother brought the postcards, and Nicky laid them out on the table. Look, she said. It took me a while to get it, but I finally did. Each one of these messages has a number in it. 3 sparrows, 1 peanut butter cookie, midnight, that's 12, and 9th birthday. It's the very simplest code. Dad taught it to me. The numbers stand for letters in the alphabet. 3 is C, 1 is A, 12 is L, 9 is I. By the time I got that much, I knew where he was. Aren't you clever? Said her mother. And isn't it wonderful? California! Yes! Nicky threw an arm around her mother's waist and hugged her. She knew what California meant to her mother, who'd grown up there and whose family had lived there for generations. For her mother, going to California would be going home. They spent the next week packing, and as they packed, Nicky told her mother everything about what had happened in Yonwood, about Otis and Amanda, about the prophet, about Grover and his snakes, and about the 3 goals she'd set for herself. What happened to those goals? Her mother asked. Did you reach them? No, said Nicky. Not really, except for falling in love with Otis. I didn't reach a single one. But she was wrong about that. Sometimes it takes much longer than you think it will to reach the goals you set for yourself. And sometimes, as it happened with Nicky, you reach your goals in strange and unpredictable ways.